Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. And it has really been an honour to be able to follow the continent's heartbeat for yet another year. From the heartbreak and uncertainties of the war in Sudan to Africa's wrestling with White House unpredictability, to the never-ending cascade of stories of creation, community and innovation. Tonight, we take a peek back at some of what 2025 delivered for Africa. So, as a top third-placed finisher, Sudan's national football team has made it through to the last 16 of the Africa Cup of Nations, despite its 2-0 loss to Burkina Faso. That good fortune in Morocco, though, belies the turmoil that continues to deepen back home. As we look back over 2025, the war in Sudan, a brutal conflict behind the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, continues. Our Naba Mohideen reminds us of a crisis that's too often overlooked.
As 2025 comes to a close, Sudan remains deeply affected by the ongoing fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, the paramilitary force that is battling the Sudanese army since April 2023, with shifting front lines and persistent challenges for civilians. The year 2025 has seen an intensified fighting in regions like Darfur and Kordofan in particular, following RSF fully controlling all of Darfur states by October 2025, after capturing Al-Fashir city, the last stronghold for the army, the capital of North Darfur, and also right now Kordofan is the new battlefield in Sudan, following the Sudanese army controlling Khartoum state and central Sudan by March 2025. So there is a power shift in areas of control since March, after the Sudanese army recaptured the capital Khartoum and expelled the RSF towards western Sudan. Fighting has been intensifying in western regions, killing thousands of people and displacing hundreds of thousands, and of course straining and hindering aid delivery for those in need. On a military front, the power has shifted multiple times. Right now, the Sudanese army is fully controlling northern states, eastern states and central Sudan, while the RSF is fully controlling Darfur and Kordofan is the new battlefield. Regarding the humanitarian situation, the crisis is still deepening, with more than 30 million people who are in a desperate need for help across Sudan, and particularly in war zones in Kordofan and in Darfur. And also there are reports of an increased targeting of civilians and aid workers, and of course aid convoys, which adding a new burden to the already fragile humanitarian situation and deepening the humanitarian crisis. Also, regarding the political situation, all of the mediation efforts have failed to find a lasting, peaceful resolution to the Sudanese crisis or end the war in Sudan, while the tensions by the Sudanese borders with Chad and South Sudan is adding a new layer of uncertainty. Despite all of these challenges, aid is still arriving, and international and local organizations are still helping those in need, the displaced populations and communities, and pushing for stability. At the year ends, Sudan right now is at a crossroad. While the conflict continues, there are hopes for a dialogue, coordination, and of course, there are hopes for at least easing the humanitarian situation before peace arrives in 2026.
Thank you so much, Naba Mohideen, there reminding us of the state of play at the moment from Port Sudan. Well, we'll widen our gaze to elsewhere in the continent now, and I'm joined now by Yinka Odegoke, who is the Africa editor for the online news website Semaphore. He joins us now from New York. Yinka, thank you so much for joining me to try and unpick the unpickable. So you heard that we started off with one of the really pivotal events on the continent, right, the ongoing war in Sudan. But we're talking 54 countries, 12 months. It's impossible to list everything. So I'm going to call upon you and your experience. What for you were some of the other big happenings on the continent that you'd like to remind us of?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I think what's really interesting about this as an Africa editor who moves around the continent regularly and meets people all the time and listens to the stories, is that this was the year for the first time since I've been doing this, that most of the story was happening here in the United States, in Washington. And that's because of the overhaul of U.S. foreign policy under President Donald Trump in his second term. It has affected everything. It started very early on with the shuttering of USAID, which was the world's largest aid agency and had a significant role in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. It was followed by the introduction of tariffs that were unpredictable and created a lot of uncertainty. I mean, tariffs don't really affect a lot of African countries, but for some countries, the uncertainty was very unsettling. Small economies like Lesotho and even South Africa were thrown off by this. And then we saw the kind of expansion of U.S. Domestic policy into, sort of or U.S. Ideology, if you like, into their kind of foreign policy. And you saw this in particular with South Africa, where President Ramaphosa was in the White House in May to come and talk about a whole variety of things, and just got railroaded by Trump in the Oval Office, where he insisted there was a white genocide going on in South Africa, which caught President Ramaphosa off guard, and he got obviously defensive, and it got very tense, and that just went on. This whole sort of U.S. unpredictability for a region which, frankly, the U.S. you could say you could have all kinds of opinions, very strong opinions as to U.S. Africa policy over the decades, but there's kind of been a stability. Right? It's kind of been predictable. You knew what was coming. And this is kind of what's changed significantly this year and affected so many other things, affected
Yinka, I'm just
migration.
going to jump in on that at the moment, because, one of the more recent developments has been the US's crackdown on visas for a number of African countries. Now, what we saw on Wednesday was that Mali and Burkina Faso actually announced their own tit-for-tat travel restrictions for American nationals. So I'll come back to you. We'll just kind of have a quick look at what that means. Clarice Fortuné brings us more.
In Bamako and Ouagadougou, the message is the same. If the United States won't let their citizens in, American travelers will now face equivalent restrictions. People in Bamako welcome the tit-for-tat move on American nationals.
It's a diplomatic struggle. Often it ends in a standoff. They've shown their power. It's up to us to defend our dignity and patriotism. We can no longer allow any country, whether it be a superpower or a third country, to disrespect us. Respect is mutual.
Earlier this month, President Trump expanded a long-standing travel ban, adding 7 more countries, including Mali and Burkina Faso, to a list that already limits entry to nearly 40 nationalities. Both Mali and Burkina Faso say Washington acted without consultation, accusing the US of penalizing people purely on the basis of nationality. The US travel policy still allows exemptions, including for World Cup athletes next year, but there are no guarantees for ordinary fans. For many, this latest move raises questions about where relations go next.
Yinka, I'm going to force us to pivot away from Washington. Anything else that happened on the continent, the African continent, that you think should have attracted more attention?
Well, one thing that did attract a lot of attention, obviously, was the DRC, the Congo, and Rwanda sort of coming to some sort of peace agreement after nearly 30 years of conflict. So we're hoping that works out, but we will see how that plays out. Then there was, then I suppose in terms of big trends, you look at things like how the increasing role of the Gulf nations in African economies. For years we've all written or broadcast stories about China's role in Africa, and now we're seeing the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia all sort of play a more significant role in terms of economic engagement. One more story will be critical minerals, the growing importance of critical minerals in the global economy and the role that African countries, several major African countries, will play in the way critical minerals, which would be essential towards everything, renewables and electric vehicles, all that kind of stuff, artificial intelligence. A lot of those minerals will be sourced on the African continent.
Thank you so much, Yinka. It's such a shame that there is never enough time to speak of all of which we would like to speak of, but I'm sure that we will see you again. Thank you very much for helping us break down just some of the shape of the news landscape across Africa for 2025. And thank you, our viewers, for the time that you have taken to stick with Eye on Africa in 2025 and over the years. So we wish you a very happy 2026, and we'll leave you with some spectacular moments of culture and community from across the continent over the last 12 months.